Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the differences that Fox is making to their broadcasting of college football in the fall. It looks like they're going to go towards a more pronounced Friday day with a bigger game on the Fridays leading up to the Saturday of college football. So I'm a big fan, but I'm sure there are a lot of people that aren't quite as big a fan, so let me know what you think in the comments. But let's jump into segment two. Actually, before we jump into segment two, I want to remind you all that we get a ton of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help to us here at the network, but to you all as well to see your questions come across the screen. We can have a fun back and forth and maybe get into a little conversation here. Again, that's GSMCPodcast.net. Alrighty, let's jump into Chris Simms' quarterback rankings. Chris Simms has been one of the biggest names in NFL draft coverage for quite some time. He's been a huge guy that people look at when it comes to quarterback rankings and things of that nature because he played the position. He was a former quarterback at Texas. Was in the NFL for some time, and then is now a reporter at NBC, and every year he releases his rankings for the quarterbacks going into this draft, and he's had some up and down rankings. I don't think there's any argument about that, but for the most part, he hits on a pretty high clip. He had C.J. Stroud in a tier of his own a year ago, which is obviously what happened, and then the year before that, he did have Matt Corral up top, which is a little bit different, but that was a weird class with Sam Howell kind of leading the way as of right now, and Brock Purdy, I guess. So I don't think anyone really got that one right. And then even going back further, he had Lamar Jack. Excuse me, sorry, dealing with a little bit of a sore throat here, but. Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, he had above Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold in 2018. That has obviously come through. And then he had Patrick Mahomes as the top guy in 2017. So definitely a lot of good rankings. Obviously some ones that he's missed on, but a very smart guy that obviously knows the position. So let's jump into his rankings this year. Caleb Williams. I think everyone has him up top, but he has him in a tier of his own. He thinks he is a transcendent type of guy and one of the best quarterback prospects that he's seen covering football. He thinks he can do a number of things that quarterbacks normally can't do. So he is in a kind of tier of his own up top. And then you get to tier 2 and it's Jaden Daniels. And the way he put this tier would be number 1 in other years, which makes sense. I think there's a number of years where Jaden Daniels would have gone number 1 and people wouldn't have thought two times about it. Obviously, coming off the Heisman season helps him a lot, but everything is right where it needs to be when Jaden Daniels goes through his mechanics and goes through his progressions. His mechanical footwork is flawless, according to Chris Simms, and I tend to agree. The dude just, everything in his throwing motion is absolutely beautiful, so I totally understand that. 2-3 is where things get a little bit off the rails, in my opinion. Tier 3, he has as franchise starting quarterbacks, and he has Bo Nix at 3, Michael Penix at 4, and then J.J. McCarthy at 5. He said he loves Bo Nix's frame and ability to create off schedule, which I do too. He's remarkable in that sense. He said Michael Penix's in-pocket ability is probably as good as anyone in the entire draft, which is absolutely true. And then he said JJ has a ton of tools, can throw from different arm angles, has a really strong arm that I think a lot of people don't necessarily notice when seeing him for the first time, but it is pretty, he has a lot of arm talent and a lot of arm strength to go behind that. So those three guys fall into his franchise starting quarterback role. I'll get into why I don't necessarily agree with him on that, but let's finish out his rankings. Tier 4, he has talented projects, and is Drake May. Drake May, he said there are some mechanical issues that need to be fixed before he can jump into the league and start. So he thinks the best thing for him would to be sit behind a talented veteran that can kind of teach him the ways, teach him especially in the footwork aspect of things. If he can tighten up those things, then maybe down the road he can be a starter. But for the time being, he thinks that sitting would be the best thing for Drake May. So these have obviously a lot of different takes that people don't necessarily agree with. A lot of people have Drake May right up there with the big dogs of Caleb Williams and Jane Daniels. A lot of people, have J.J. McCarthy right up there with him as well. A lot of people love Michael Penix. A lot of people don't love Michael Penix. So there's a lot of dissension on all of this type of stuff. I think there's a ton of different ways you can rank these guys, because the way I look at it, all of these guys have different strengths, all of these guys have different ability, and all of these guys have the ability to be successful at the next level. But as we know, it's not quite as easy as it seems in going through combine work and up till draft day. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this kind of comes to fruition. But as for my major takeaways from these 6 rankings of these 6 guys, there's almost no way there will be 5 franchise quarterbacks in this draft. I think there are a lot of really, really talented guys in this draft, and the ability is off the charts for some of these guys. But if this was a 5 franchise quarterback draft, it would be the best quarterback draft probably of all time. I think everyone would be stunned if 5 of these guys ended up being genuine franchise quarterbacks in the future. If history has any validity to it, it looks like it'll probably be 1 to 2 guys. I think there are 2 in particular that I think have the ability to transform a franchise. I think the rest of the guys have a little bit of a thinner road, I guess is the way to say it, to be the franchise guy. So before I jump into my rankings, I do want to say, excuse me, I do apologize. My throat is very stuffed up today. But before I jump into my rankings of these guys, there are a number of different ways to put these guys. I don't think there's any right way to do it necessarily. There's so many different body types and abilities and play types that it depends on what you value the most and what you like the most. So all of this will be a little bit different than maybe what you have, and I'd love to hear what you all have in the comments here, but definitely keep that in mind as we go throughout this. But let's start in Tier 1. Tier 1 to me is Caleb Williams and Jane Daniels. I know there are a lot of people that, including Chris Simms, that have Caleb Williams alone up top, and I totally get that. His ability to create off balance and off schedule is just remarkable. But when I look at it, I think Caleb Williams has all the talent in the world, has all the ability in the world. I think Jaden Daniels is just slightly more polished when you're talking about in-pocket passing and going through the normal progressions that need to go through. So I think both these guys are remarkable in and out of the pocket. Both these guys are remarkable on and off schedule, on and off balance. They can make some wild plays, but I don't see much separating these guys, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think there's anything that Caleb Williams does that is marketably better than Jaden Daniels. So I kind of have them as 1A, 1B. I think I could rank them either way, if I'm being totally honest. I think both these guys are remarkably talented. I think whoever ends up getting them is getting not only a guy that can transform your franchise on the field, but I also do think, I know there is some question marks around Caleb Williams, but I do think both these guys are genuine leaders. I think they can handle whatever is going to be thrown at them, and although there are some not so nice things being said about Caleb Williams throughout this process, I think he has a good head on his shoulders. He knows what he's doing, especially when it comes to locker rooms and on the field. So I wouldn't worry too much about him. But if you're looking for that classic leader of sorts that people always talk about in locker rooms, I think Jaden Daniels fits that mold just a little bit better. But I think the margins between these guys are so thin. So I think they're right around each other. And then Tier 2 for me is kind of possible franchise guys. 2 guys that I think have all the ability in the world, but might need a good situation for all of this to come to fruition. So let's start with Drake May at 3. He is someone that has every tool in the world. There is not a thing on a football field that Drake May can't do. Obviously, not necessarily a remarkable runner like Jaden Daniels or one of these other guys, but he has ability. There's no two ways about that. He can do a number of things with the ball that not a lot of people on planet Earth can do. So Drake May, I really, really like. I think he has a ton of ability, but there is a little bit of worry about, his turnover issues and kind of forcing the ball at times and being that superhero that you don't really have to be at the NFL level. Sometimes in college when, maybe your offensive line isn't quite as talented or the receivers you're playing with aren't quite as talented like Drake May was in a lot of cases. It could be that he had to force sometimes in college, and maybe it's not a problem at the next level, but it is something I keep my eye on because it could become a big problem if he continues to kind of create for himself when he doesn't really need to, I guess is the best way to put it. And then for at the 4 position, I have J.J. McCarthy, much like a lot of people. I think this one to me is just betting on a bunch of traits. There are a ton of things to like from J.J. McCarthy when you look at his tape. I think obviously not the volume passer that people love to get because you're going to be asked to do a lot of things in an NFL game that J.J. McCarthy wasn't necessarily asked to do at Michigan. So there's going to be some things that he's going to have to kind of wrap his head around and get used to, but at the end of the day, has a ton of arm strength, has a ton of arm talent like Chris Simms talked about, and can make plays with his legs, which is something you don't necessarily always say about someone coming straight into the league and someone that in college was not necessarily the biggest running threat, definitely created with his legs when he needed to, but he's someone that I think is uber athletic, can do a number of different things, but in my eyes, both of these guys would very much benefit from having a veteran in front of them for maybe a year or two, learning the ropes, getting everything down to a T, and then putting them out in the field and letting them do their thing, whether that's with the Commanders or the Steelers or any of these teams, I think would benefit from having these two guys, and at the very least, letting them develop under a veteran, and I think if you do that and you garner these guys the right way, they can really shine. It's just going to take a little bit more time for these guys. And then tier 3 is kind of a weird one. I tend to believe that those 4 guys up top are, I don't want to say the only guys that have a real chance to be a franchise guy, because I think these next 2 guys have a real shot, but those are the guys that I would put any money on to be a franchise starting quarterback for a long time, because after this, it gets a little bit more sketchy. So in my tier 3, I have 2 guys that I think have the ability, have a ton of things that you have to like as an NFL guy, but there are still a ton of question marks. And I think it would have to be kind of a Brock Purdy, San Fran situation where the system fits the guy to such a degree that they are going to succeed if these guys are going to be long-term NFL quarterbacks. But they could always prove me wrong, of course. But these 2 guys, in 5, I have Bo Nix, and then 6, I have Michael Penix. So a little bit of a flip from what most people have. I think most people have Penix above Nix at this point, but the way I look at it is, if I'm going to draft a young quarterback and I'm going to put him in a position to start, even in his 2nd or 3rd year, I need him to be able to create off schedule. I need him to be able to get out, evade a rush, get to the open part of the field, and then make a throw. Michael Penix is remarkable inside the pocket. He does incredible things with the ball and can spin it as well as anyone in the entire draft class, but when he leaves the pocket, or if he can even get out of the pocket, it gets a little bit more sketchy for him. So I tend to value Bo Nix's athletic ability because I think the passing gap is not necessarily as big between these two as the athleticism and the running gap between Bo Nix and Michael Penix. So I tend to lean Bo Nix, but again, I think these are 2 guys that unless they're drafted into very, very good situations and have tons of talent around them and a great play caller, I wouldn't necessarily bet on these guys to be franchise guys. But at the end of the day, as we talked about earlier, this is a very talented group. There are tons of guys that have ability. There are tons of guys that could be franchise quarterbacks and make me look kind of dumb. But out of these 6 guys, I think any number of them could. Any combination of those 6 guys could, make their impact early and, be on that remarkable track that guys like C.J. Stroud and Brock Purdy are on. But in my eyes, Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels just stand above everyone else. I think they have the ability to walk into a franchise and everything changes pretty much the second they walk in the door. So, although, it's very unlikely that even both these guys hit because it's usually just one guy per draft. But I think these are the 2 guys that will kind of set your franchise off on a different path than it's on right now. So whoever drafts them, whether it's the Bears or the Commanders or the Patriots, I've seen the Falcons trade up a million different options for these guys. But wherever they go, I think the team is going to be really happy to have them on and off the field. So I really like those guys. We will definitely revisit these after they get drafted to see what the fit is and see maybe these tiers change. Maybe Bo Nix and Michael Penix are drafted into perfect situations and I bump them up a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this goes down, but we will definitely revisit those. But for the time being, I think it's Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, and pretty much everyone else in this draft class. But we're going to take a little break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk some spring questions. We got into it yesterday a little bit, and my mind was still rolling after the show, so I had to get a couple more out there. I have 5 questions that we will go into right after the break, so stick with us.